and welcome. This is Reading by the Moon. I am Josephine Moon, and tonight we are absolutely chuffed to have with us the wonderful Alli Sinclair, author of The Codebreakers. Alli is a great writer and a great human being, and just so you know, we only have great human beings on this show. Alli, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Miss Moon.
Where are you joining us from?
Sunny Victoria. So we got a really good taste of winter today. So I'm actually from Geelong, so an hour from Melbourne, and very close to the coast. And so we get all that lovely cool breeze.
Are you a winter person or a summer person?
I'm an autumn. So I love the cool sunny days and the crispness, and I love the colours of autumn.
Yeah, nice.
But I do like that we have 4 seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Ours blur a little bit up here in Queensland.
Yeah.
Alli, you have written a gorgeous book. This is this your 5th novel?
6th
novel, and they're all historical fictions.
Yeah, they all have elements of historical. My first 3 had an historical storyline and also a contemporary storyline. And then number 4, Burning Fields, were both historical. So it was 1948 Queensland and 1943 Italy. And then the last one, The Cinema at Starlight Creek, was 1990s Queensland and 1950s Hollywood. And yeah, this one is 1940s right up to 2009.
You've covered a lot of territory, and we have lots of questions for you about history and research and all sorts of things. This book, for anyone who has not yet read this book follows a group of women, and predominantly, and her name's just brought Alli, who's just popped out of my head. Alli, who is, so this is set in Brisbane, which I love because I grew up in Brisbane, and it was so interesting to me to read about wartime in Brisbane, and we'll go back to that a bit later. But it follows Alli and this group of women who are recruited by the wartime efforts to work on breaking codes, so cracking secrets. But the rub of this situation is that they're told they're never ever allowed to tell anyone what they've done. So even further on down the track, they get married, they have children, they're never allowed to tell anyone what they have done in the war, which is just, I mean, it's really hard to understand why that was the case. Like, are there any really good reasons for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So they were asked to sign the Official Secrets Act, and they knew that they had to keep secret about what they were doing during the war, because a lot of what they handled in terms of the intercepted communications from the Japanese Army and the Japanese Navy, a lot of that information was really highly classified, and they were dealing with that on a daily basis. And they also had communications that were going between them and, say, Bletchley Park over in the UK and Arlington Hall over in the USA. So that they knew was, top secret stuff. They had to keep quiet during the war. But a lot of the things that they were working on during the war actually ended up playing a really big part in Australia's security years later. So when we sort of then went into the Cold War, a lot of the information that they had been gathering and a lot of the techniques that they'd been using were also used post-war as well. So this, Official Secrets Act, that's why it sort of dragged on for decades and decades and decades, and why they couldn't talk about what they did.
Right. So they preempted this and said, we'll let you know, maybe, if we want to, when you can ever.
If we remember to let you know.
Yeah, we'll send you an email. Email wasn't even invented. We'll tell you at some point. Now, you have actually tracked down real life code breakers. I know people have a lot of questions about that. So can you tell us a little bit about how you found these people? And I want to know, where did this story come from? Where did you find, this idea? Where did it come from? And how did you track down these women?
Yeah, cool. So in 2018, I wrote Burning Fields, and my main character, Rosie, I had her working for the Australian Women's Army Service in Brisbane. So the actual story took place in 1948, and I just had reference that that's what she'd done. But I actually kind of like the idea of maybe sending a story in World War II in Brisbane, because I knew it was a really big time of change. You know, they had 100,000 Allied troops come and, you know, live in Brisbane, and they were, you know, camped in parks and camped at the race courses. And so I knew it was a really interesting period of time. So I just started Googling, and I just did the old, you know, Australian Women's Army Service, World War II, Brisbane, and a really tiny article about Central Bureau popped up. I'm like, what's this Central Bureau? And, you know, why haven't we heard of it before? And then I started digging deeper, and then I realized it was an elite signals intelligence organization, and there were code breakers. So I started digging even more, and then I found out we had female code breakers, and these female code breakers actually worked in a tiny garage at the back of a mansion, and the men were working in the mansion in a very leafy suburb of Brisbane. I'm like, okay, I know there's a story here. So I tried to track down more information, and I came across a really fantastic non-fiction book written by David Dufty. And so I read up more on the code breakers, and he had a tiny little chapter about the women, and he mentioned their names. So in the name of research, I never have a problem asking anyone for anything. So I contacted David, and he was amazing. So we had quite a few telephone conversations, and obviously, you know, he wanted to make sure I wasn't some, you know, nutcase. And then eventually he said, all right, okay, I will introduce you to these ladies. And so he had a chat with them to make sure they felt comfortable. And eventually, yes, I got given their phone numbers, and then we chatted quite a few times. And yeah, eventually I, you know, got to meet them face to face, and it's been amazing, because from these women, I've developed these amazing relationships with them. Like we're good mates, and I love it. It's like they're my standing grandmas.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And there's so much for me reading this book too. So much, and I've only had these conversations with people recently, that when I was going through school and I studied modern history at school, we weren't really taught anything about what happened in Australia. I was probably 40, well, maybe 30 something when I saw the movie Australia, with Nicole Kidman and who's the other guy in it?
Hugh Jackman. Come on, Josephine.
That's right.
And you call yourself an Aussie?
I was going to say Mel Gibson. I'm like, that's not the right one. No, Hugh. Of course, it was Hugh Jackman. And you know, and there's the bombing of Darwin, and it was like, what the hell is this? I've never heard of this, right? And then when I went to Darwin, I researched for the Jam Queens, and you know, went to the whole thing, and like more and more, and this is unbelievable. Like we just weren't taught about this. It was all about Europe and Nazis and Germany. And that was all we were taught. Now, I had two grandfathers who were both in PNG. I know nothing about what they did there. And in fact, reading this book really made me think, why is it that I don't know anything? Like, they would never talk, right? But everybody, I think, always assumes, well, they didn't talk because they were traumatized, and, you know, and that, well, may be the case. But reading your book, I started going, were they all silenced? Like, we don't know even, you know, who's been silenced and why they've been silenced, and how much information is just gone that we'll never ever know about. So it just blew my mind, really did.
Yeah, well, even 2 weeks ago, I did a talk at the Geelong Library, and there was a gentleman there, and he said he had read the Codebreakers, and he said, my dad was a codebreaker. I'm like, what? Because, I've been trying to track them all down. I've been speaking to the men as well. Unfortunately, his dad had passed away, but he said it was only a few years ago that his dad told the family about what he did. And it turned out his brother also worked in signals intelligence for Australia, and he was sworn to secrecy. They were in different departments, but, you know, still worked under, I guess, the same banner of signals intelligence. So they both worked in really similar areas, and they didn't know until probably 10, 15 years ago what they'd done. So,
that's just amazing. Isn't that amazing? So, I really have so many questions now about what my grandparents did. And even both my grandmothers also, you know, worked in land armies or whatever they did. I don't know nothing. Like they just didn't talk about anything. So it's fascinating on so many levels about that. I am going to let other people talk because I know everybody has a lot that they want to ask you and talk about. But yeah, I did really appreciate reading about Brisbane and reading about, you know, these suburbs that I just sort of grew up in, and this mention of Chermside. Like Chermside is just like a shopping county. Like it just, you know, like it's just sort of, it's a real mind bend to even think about that kind of thing. But I will hand over to Mary Lou, first of all, who had some questions for you on research as well.
Oh, cool.
Look, Ali, I love this book, and I learned so much too. And I love reading historical fiction because I do get to learn so much. I have sticky notes.
Oh, awesome. I love it.
A lot of the sticky notes were just about, look, I shouldn't be shocked because I've read so much historical fiction, but just the difference between the way the men and the women were treated. And as you said, the women were in a hot or freezing cold garage, and the men are in this beautiful house. The women are in barracks, the men are put up in a hotel. There's all that kind of stuff all the way through it, and how Ellie deals with Charlie a bit later on when she gets moved to work with the men. And she does some really fabulous stuff in this book. And I know that you have based her on several different true characters. So can you tell us about the characters that you based Ellie on?
Yeah, Ellie, she was a bit of a writer's dream. It's not very often that, you know, you get a character that's fully formed. I knew who she was and what she was about from the minute I kind of cracked open the manuscript. But I think a lot of that also helped because I had done so much research, and I'd also had been able to talk to the real Codebreakers. And even though, you know, they're all individuals and different people and have different life experiences, there were a few common traits with these women, which I found sort of popped up with Ellie. And, you know, the whole, I've got a job to do, I've just got to get on with it, you know, any personal issues, I've just got to push those aside because I can't make a mistake, you know, and the acceptance of having to remain silent about your work, even though, you know, it can be to the detriment of other relationships as well. So Ellie is definitely, I think, a combination of, I guess, my imagination, but also has had a heavy influence by the real life Codebreakers. Interestingly enough, when they were reading it, they were often picking out bits going, is that bit about me? So they were trying to find bits. Yeah, but Sarah Jackson, who is, she appears sort of really early on, and she's Ellie's boss at Qantas Empire Airways. She's actually modelled off Connie Jordan, who was an amazing lady. She was an aircraft engineer, highly qualified, but she also held 4 degrees from Trinity College. She was a really accomplished ballroom dancer, like basically whatever she turned her hand at, you know, she was just really good at, but she was also really competent at her job. And there is a scene where the men decide to go on strike in the book, and that actually happened. So, yeah, so if you want to read more up on Connie Jordan, her life story is actually really interesting as well.
I do have one more question if I can, because I know we've got lots of questions. Did you learn Japanese Morse code? I just found that fascinating, the stuff about the Japanese Morse code.
I did. You know, I'm no expert, but I was really lucky. I got to speak to a couple of gentlemen who worked with the Japanese Morse code, and I am sort of a big believer in, you know, understanding what I'm writing about, because I guess it just helps me, but it also helps the reader as well if I, you know, can write competently about it. But it took me a really long time to figure it out. It wasn't easy. And bless them, they were so patient, and they let me ask so many questions, but they were great, and they sent me lots of sheets. They actually still had some of the original sheets with the Morse code on it, so I could understand how it all sort of worked and how it fit together. So yeah, that was really, really great to be able to do that.
Well, I'm just going to butt in because I know there's so many questions, but how long did it take you to put all this research together for this book?
Yeah, look, off and on. I mean, I had another book I was writing at the time, but off and on about 2 years. Like, yeah, this book seriously nearly broke me. It's just, so many different aspects, because it wasn't just the Codebreakers, because, I covered, Qantas, and also, the Flying Doctors, and, Charleville, US space. So there was a lot of different factors that I had to weave in there. So yeah, at times I was wondering what on earth I was doing and why I had thought this was a good idea. But it was worth it. And plus, I've also got to give kudos to my editor. She really helped me pull it together. She was amazing. Yeah.
A good editor is worth their weight in gold.
Oh, yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, that's really good. I'm going to pass you over now to our guest panelist tonight, who is Maya Linnell, who many of you will already know. And Maya has a book coming out very soon as well. And she wanted to ask you about the success of this book, because it seems to be everywhere. And then maybe you can tell us your special announcement.
Okay, right, that sounds good.
Yeah, so I'll pass you over to Maya.
Thank you, Joy. It's lovely to be here tonight. Alli, look, this book, you were super excited about it when you were talking to me at the RWA conference a couple of years back when we first met in person. Look, it's really rocketed into the world in the best way, and I've seen it everywhere, as well as the bookshelves, I've seen it in magazines, and I hear there's some exciting news coming up very soon. We were talking about it at the Clunes Book Festival last weekend, and I'd just love to know that when you were starting to put the little seeds together and create your story, did you have any idea that this would just hit such a fantastic nerve? I mean, the queue at the Clunes Book Festival was huge. Everyone wanted to chat to you about the Codebreakers, because it's a great book. I loved it. Did you have an idea that it was going to be such a big, fantastic grab point?
Oh, that's a really good question. Look, I mean, we always hope that whatever we're working on is going to hit the right notes with readers. I think right from the beginning, I knew this was a really special story because it was just untold, these female codebreakers in Brisbane. And I just kind of felt that it was one of those stories that people were going to take hold of, because it has that wow factor. It's like, wow, I didn't know we had codebreakers, and I remember my excitement when I first found out about them. And it's really great. Like, then to see other people, like readers and book reviewers and booksellers all going, what? I didn't know. So I think it's got such a great talking point. And also, I think the people also realise the importance of having the legacy of these ladies live on. And that's one of the things I'm so happy about is, people are talking about that. And if they keep talking about it and they read about it and tell others about it, then these amazing men and women, their story gets to live on, which is really, really awesome, because it was silent for such a long, long time.
Right.
Well, maybe you can take that moment to tell us your exciting news.
Okay, so last week, myself and Coral and Joy, two of the Codebreakers who are in their 90s, we were filming for the project, and they're putting a special story together. I'm hoping it'll be the end of this week. If not, it'll be next week. But don't worry, I'll broadcast it all over the socials when I know which day it is. Or feel free to message me if you want. But I suspect it will probably be towards the end of this week. I know the producer was working on the story. She's been working really hard on the story, and they're just kind of editing and putting it all together. So yeah, it's a bit exciting.
It's awesome news. It's really great. We can't wait to watch it. That's fabulous. Thanks for announcing it here first on the show.
Yeah, you heard it first.
That we will all be watching for sure. I'm going to hand it over to Sandy now, who's going to continue all the millions of questions that we have for you until we run out.
I love it. It's awesome.
I have about 600 questions, but I know I'm not allowed to ask that many. As a reader, one of my go-to genres is historical fiction. It's one of the genres that I just love immersing myself in. And I've noticed, particularly recently, there's a real surge on stories set during particularly World War II. So during wartime, but particularly World War II. And I know why I love reading about that, but I wanted to know, as an author, what draws you to that particular era in time?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I think probably because I always grew up listening to 40s music. My nan was an amazing storyteller. So she used to tell me a lot about growing up and, you know, the 40s and the 50s and what life was like back then. And she always painted a really vivid picture. So I think for me, because I'm really, you know, was really close with my nan, I guess it just gives me a little taste of you know, what the era of our grandparents or great grandparents could have been like and what it was like, and it's really fun to explore those stories. But yeah, I'm definitely drawn to that era. It's definitely my go-to time.
And as Jo said, and I know I was telling a friend of mine who is an avid reader across, you know, pretty much every genre you can think of, and she said, "Oh, what are you reading?" I said, "Oh, I'm reading the Codebreakers." And she said, "Oh, is that about Bletchley Park?" And I said, No, it's about the Australian Codebreakers." And she was like, "What? I didn't know we had Codebreakers in Australia."
Yeah.
And I find it really interesting that there's so much we still don't know. It's in living memory. World War II is within living memory. And I've been doing my own research for a couple of my books. And I put a call out to Facebook just a week ago, I think it was, about the Japanese internment. And somebody came back to me and said, "Oh, yeah, my father-in-law was in Singapore." And I said, No, the Japanese that were interned here in Australia. And she went, "We didn't do that." I'm like, "Yeah, we did."
And the Italians and
yeah. And I wanted to let your research and how much do we not know about this particular era in time? You know, we think we know it, like Jo said, but there's so much we don't actually know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to write this story is I didn't want this story to escape. Like I didn't want this story to pass us by and us never know about it. And that's why I'm loving the whole resurgence of historical fiction, especially during World War II and World War I, is we're finally capturing these stories before it's too late. So it's really great that there's so many writers out there doing that. Plus, selfishly, I also love reading their stories as well. So,
Do you think you'll do more? Do you think you'll do more? Do you think you'll keep going in that? Like now that you've got all this research on board, it seems like, you know, it would be a shame to waste it. You can just keep going and going.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard a few people say to me, "Oh, is there a sequel?" No, I think I might take a little break. But I am currently, my new one is sort of set in late 1800s in France and 1947 India and present day Australia. And then the next one after that is actually set in Berlin in the 60s and the late 80s. So yeah, I'm taking a little break, but I know I'm going to come back to it because there's an endless stream of stories. But I'm constantly looking out. So yeah, you know, I'm sure my notebook will be filled with lots of ideas for sure. Yeah.
Just because we can keep talking. Sandy, just circling back to what you were saying there about internment, I was having this conversation with my sister recently because my birth surname is a German name because there was an adoption. My great-grandfather was adopted by a German couple. But like when I sort of was reading this book and thinking about this, and I went back thinking, well, they must have come to Australia prior to World War One.
Oh, wow.
Which made me think, well, yeah, would they have been interned during World War I and World War II, or did they, you know, I know sometimes some people weren't interned because they were considered to be in a special category, you know, that like, or whatever, they were deemed trustworthy or whatever it was. But yeah, I only came across that whole internment thing when I was researching a book set in rural Australia in the 50s, and came across that whole, you know, the sort of, not the remains of internment camps, but like what was left behind, and thinking, what is this? Like, I've never heard of this before. Yeah, there is just so much we don't know. And you're right, Sandy, it is just still so much a part of, you know, us. Like I always say that about characters. You look at their parents to see, or I do anyway, I think about, well, who are their parents to inform that character. But I also think, well, you need to look at the grandparents as well, because grandparents still have such a influence potentially on us and on characters. And that's still our history very much living right now.
Yeah.
So fascinating. We could just, honestly, we could just talk about this. I will just ask if anyone's got any final burning questions that they need to ask Alli before we do our look around of books we're currently reading. Mary Lou.
I guess you did so much research for this. I'm assuming you learned to fly a plane as well.
Oh, actually, my hubby's a pilot. So, and also Helene Young, she helped me as well with those flying scenes. Bless her. So it was good.
Were there any elements or stories that you had to leave out? And if you had, was it hard?
There weren't any elements, but there were times. So I got to know a couple of professors who signals intelligence in Australia, and you know, you ask, you know, someone a question, you know, and it's their passion, then you get like, you know, 5 research books and, you know, 3 hours speech about the importance of signals intelligence. So I got a lot of information, and it was the same when I went to Bletchley Park. So the women worked on the Typex machines, which is what they encoded and decoded all the messages, but I have not been able to source one in Australia. So when I was in Bletchley Park a couple of years ago, I actually found one of the experts there, and he was great, and he helped me understand it all, sort of like the Japanese code before, so I could get, you know, picture how it all worked. And where was I going with this? I was trying to think where I was going with this.
My question was, you know, knowing what to put in and what to
leave. Yeah, that's right. Yes, sorry. Yeah, so I had, you know, like, you know, big 4 paragraphs about signals intelligence and blah, blah, blah. And my editor's just gone, you know what, Elle? It's great that you understand this, but I really think we could just probably 3 sentences will cover it. So, because I was starting to read a bit technical, which, yeah. So, yeah, so there are bits, you know, that, yes, you can spend a long time researching and it ends up being 1 sentence, or, you know, gets cut out altogether. I can't remember any major bits that were cut out, but definitely there were bits that were condensed.
Well, you know, if you ever need another job after writing, you could probably apply to intelligence.
Yeah,
you now know how to work all the coding and decoding.
Yeah.
In fact, they probably already know about you, Alli. They've probably already highlighted your name. Here's one pre-trained.
Wonder why that black car's been parked in my street.
Does anyone else have any burning questions for Alli? See if I'm...
Yes, I would. I'd love to ask Alli. The beautiful little love letters sent between one of the Codebreakers and her boyfriend is such a nice little plot point. Can you please tell us a little bit about how that one came into your novel?
Oh, yes. Coral the Codebreaker. So, yes, so real life Coral has the most beautiful romantic story, and with her permission, she let me include it in the book. So Coral was working in the cipher office at you know, one of the garage girls, and she met Sandy. And Sandy was there in the garage. He was helping the girls understand the machines, and they went out a couple of times, and then he got sent up north and then eventually sent overseas to the Philippines. So they still communicated with each other. The officers all communicated with each other. So the way that the messages work is you have a filler text or padding, and then you have sort of like the real message, and then you have the padding again. So it might be, you know, it's another cold day in Geelong, you know, Hitler's planes are blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, my dog eats carrots, or what, you know, like nonsensical stuff. And then it all gets scrambled in the machine and comes out the other end. So the person receiving the message then sort of gets rid of the filler text, then sends the important message to where it needs to go. So Coral and Sandy realised they could actually send each other messages in the filler text. So they actually dated through codes between their offices, which is just so awesome. And then Sandy actually, he proposed to her and came back, and they were married for 68 years until Sandy passed away. And it's so beautiful, because when Coral tells this story, she goes back, you know, you can just see her, and she's that 19, 20-year-old again, and she's meeting Sandy for the first time. And it's beautiful. Yeah, I love that story. I could not have made that story up. Like, it's just so lovely to include something real in there.
That's gorgeous. Did he propose to her via philotext?
No, he actually proposed to her by a letter, though. He had a friend who was coming to Brisbane, and of course, you know, the army would all censor all the letters and everything if he sent it by post. So he actually kind of smuggled out a handwritten letter with his friend that got hand delivered to Coral, and then he asked her that way.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
I know, it's gorgeous.
I don't even know where to go with that. That's just
I know. It's just always refers to my sweetheart Sandy. That's beautiful.
Oh, beautiful. All right, any final questions? Going.
Was there just one last one from me? Was there anything in your research that surprised you? Because I found when I was reading the book, like I probably arrogantly like to think of myself as fairly well versed in this area. But you talked about the Brisbane line, and I was like, what is the Brisbane? Like, really? We were going to give the top half to the Japanese? Like, that blew my mind away. How many nuggets of those sorts of things did you find in your research that you went, what?
Yeah, Brisbane line was definitely one of them. And it's really interesting because I speak to a lot of Brisbaneites, they're like, what? I didn't know that. Yeah, that was really contentious, and it was quite interesting to talk to people who grew up in Brisbane at the time, and they said, you know, even though the government said, oh no, we're not going to do that, yeah, there was a real threat. Like, people really thought that could happen. That was one. And also Charleville, the US Army base just outside of Charleville, that I found that one was really interesting. That, you know, there was the fake US Army base that was, you know, had the balsa wood and the cardboard planes and the fake runway and all that sort of stuff, in case the Japanese made it that far south, they'd bomb that. And then you had the real airstrip, which was covered in mulga branches, you know, miles away. Yeah, like, I found that really interesting. And then when I heard that there were two stories that, you know, some people thought, oh, that it was the Australians who, you know, were contracted to work on the US Army base who were sworn to secrecy with the US government. And then you have the other story that the whole town knew about it, and then they were sworn to secrecy. And no one's actually been able to prove either way. Even now. Is really cool. Actually, I love that we still don't really know for sure which story is right. Yeah. I'm beginning to think, though, like, you know, I'm sure there would have been leaks if it was a whole town. But who knows?
Yeah, old Mabel at the tuck shop, she would have said something.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, Sandy. I was, as a Brisbaneite, very shocked by that as well. I was just like, okay, I've not had that before. In fact, I was even shocked by the submarines down in Sydney Harbour too.
I knew about that one. Yeah, I know. Maybe because I'm from Sydney, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah.
But it is, it's those gems that you find, you know, that's what kind of makes, I guess, writing historicals and finding those gems so rewarding. Like, you know, all those hours just been poring over books and getting nowhere, and then all of a sudden you find something, you're like, what? Yeah, okay, I have to. Sorry about my dog.
That's all right.
If anyone can hear it. That you're like, oh, I have to include that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming along and talking to us about this, Alli. I do think we could talk for another 2 hours. But we will have to give our weekly recommendations. We do a whip around at the end to see what people are reading and what you're recommending. Alli, I don't think I prepped you on that, but if you have
you didn't prep me.
We can come back to you. We'll start.
I'll listen and I'll go and grab my book.
No worries. We'll start with Maya.
Look, Jo, I love a book that's got a recipe at the back. I love a book that takes me somewhere, especially when I'm not out and about. And I've been saving this particular book for when I have got a moment to just indulge myself completely whilst I'm on holidays. I think you might recognise this cover. Fantastic book. I've already started it and loving it. So The Jam Queens by Josephine Moon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, darling. That's beautiful.
We expect some jam posts from you, Maya, on your social media soon.
Oh,
I've made the jam and it was divine, Sandy. Beautiful strawberry jam with homegrown strawberries and Jo's wonderful award-winning jam recipe. Great combo.
well, if you made it with homegrown strawberries, I'm sure it's even better than the recipe makes it sound. You should put that one in the show. It'll probably do well.
I've got a jar set aside and they're all labelled Josephine's jam.
The big question is, Maya, what music did you listen to while you were making the jam?
Yes, look, I had a mix. There was I think it was 80s or 90s pop music. So great combo.
80s.
It said it in the instructions, so who am I to argue?
I think it's the quirky thing that made it win, really. What can I say? Thank you for that. Mary Lou, what are you reading and recommending?
I haven't got it on the couch here. It's in my room. I've seen the movie, but I've never read the book. And this is my other book club pick. So it's The Dressmaker, which was turned into a film with Kate Winslet. So it'll be interesting because having seen the film first, now I'm going to read the book. And the other one that I'm reading is How to Mend a Broken Heart, Rachel Johns, who's going to be on this book club next month. So,
Indeed, she is. Thank you for that. Sandy, what are you reading and recommending?
Well, because I don't have anywhere near enough books, as you can see behind me, I did ask for 2 books for Mother's Day, and my daughter dutifully got them for me. So I've got Lovebirds by Amanda Hanson next up on my to be read pile, and those Hamilton sisters as well. So they're my next 2.
Very good. Alli, what did you come back with?
Oh, okay. So I didn't have enough time to run upstairs, unfortunately, but I've got Kanine May's new one on my bedside table. And then the other one I'm actually going to do a reread because I love Belinda Alexandra's books, and it's been quite a while since I've read this particular book, which is actually set in New Orleans, and I thought that one would actually be a nice little lead in to Rachel Johns' new book as well. So in between, I'm doing a bit of a reread, and then I'll read Rachel's one next. So
lovely. Yeah. Well, I am also reading Rachel Johns' book in prep for next. Well, actually, I'm listening to it on audio because I will always listen on audio if I can. So even though I have the very pretty cover, which I mean that purple is just divine, so I'm loving that. Just as a prop, basically anywhere in my house, just to look at. And I'm listening to that one, and I'm also listening to Kanine May's book, All We Have Is Now. And I was just trying to get up on my phone because I haven't got it yet. My cocktail and cheese book club pick wasn't not my pick, someone else's pick, is Laura and Bliss by Meg Mason. And I've read some very polarizing reviews on that book. So I'll be interested to see what's inside, and I'll be interested to see how our book club goes with that one as well. We've run out of time. Look at that. Oh, I did just want to mention that anybody who's Maya, you can do this. Anybody who has read The Jam Queens, I have a competition going at the moment to win jam from a boutique jam maker in Brisbane, and also some Australian soap. And all you have to do is take a photo of this book with any kind of jam you like. So Maya, you already got yours made. You can enter already, and you just hashtag it Queen of the Jam, and you go into the draw to win those prizes of jam and soap. So if you got the book, find some jam, put it down, take a photo, put it on socials, hashtag Queen of the Jam, and off you go. You're into the draw. Oh, this has been delightful. I wish we could talk forever. Thank you so much for coming and joining us, Alli. This has been great. Thank you for writing this very, very important book. This is such important. This is why I think historical writers are just so incredibly important, because they just uncover all this history that none of us were taught. and none of us know about, and bring it to life. And this is how we learn. We learn through fiction. So thank you very much for writing that. And on behalf of all the women whose stories were not told, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Thank you, everybody, for coming along tonight who've been in the chat room. Sorry we didn't get a chance to chat with you in person because we all just talked too much. But it was lovely to have you here, and this will go up on YouTube later as well, so you can watch it again. And so next month we have Rachel Johns on with How to Mend a Broken Heart, and that will be the final Reading by the Moon Book Club season 1. That's the end. We're wrapping at season 1 there, and then season 2 will be back sometime later in the future. So hopefully we'll see you next month for our last episode of the season. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Alli.
Thank you for having me.
Alli.
Bye.
See ya.